Welcome to the Teacher's Pep Rally. If you missed our last episode when the TPR got silly and spooky for the Halloween time, please go back and check it out. Our guest today is a computer networking infrastructure instructor, that's a mouthful, at the Career Technology Center of Lackawanna County. He is an experienced IT guy who's also skilled in curriculum design, instructional techniques, secondary education, and lesson planning. He loves to engage students in gamification and has a specific passion for Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering. Grab your controller and a large Slurpee. Please welcome to the Teacher's Pep Rally our guest, John Moran.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Johnny. All right.
Welcome, John.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here.
We're so excited to have you. And before we get started, I just want to mention that our good friend Letitia is not here recording, not feeling well. And as you know, TPR believes in taking care of self. So she's at home taking care of self, but the show must go on.
Yep.
So John, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And for those YouTube listeners or watchers, you got to check it out because he is a Disney fan like us. And so you have to see what his background is. I am totally loving it.
Yes, that's perfect.
It is
It fits.
Perfect.
So
That's the best place.
It is the best. So I mentioned, and this kind of fits actually with your background. Now people are dying to see it. You have a passion for obviously technology, and in particular, computer hardware, and I believe software. Yes, or mostly hardware.
We do computer hardware, software, and computer networking. Those are kind of the three levels of kind of my curriculum and what I'm kind of into tech-wise.
That's great. And can you tell us a little bit about the journey to becoming an educator for these things?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So I actually went to the Career Tech Center that I teach at when I was in high school. I actually went for drafting and design technology. I wanted to be an architect. And when I started enrolling in colleges and everything, there wasn't anything too local that had a program like that. And I was always interested in taking things apart, putting them back together, seeing how things work. And I actually used my first bit of graduation money to build my first computer. So entering college, I had a computer that I built myself, and I enrolled at Keystone College for information technology. From there, I kind of grew my passion of IT, learned the business aspect of it, and kind of got my first exposure of kind of computer networking outside of kind of tinkering at my house. So more of what I could do out in industry. From there, I was a technical analyst at First National Community Bank, kind of doing just day-to-day help desk stuff. After that, I kind of worked back at Keystone College. I was their data guy for the admissions office. So that's when I got my first kind of experience working in kind of higher ed. It was interesting because I went to Keystone and now working there was kind of neat seeing that flip side. From there, I got my first job at an actual K-12 school. I was the IT coordinator for Abington Heights Middle School, and I was there for about 2.5 years. Had no plans on leaving, loved what I was doing, loved working with teachers, students, administration, kind of making sure all their tech needs were met and kind of putting out new initiatives. Then I got word from a couple faculty members that I know at the Career Tech Center. They're like, hey, we're looking to expand our computer program, add a little bit on, and we think you should apply for it. So I actually applied in March for the position, interviewed in August, and got hired the day students started showing up. So my first day at the school was the first day students were there. And the kicker on top of it, I always show all my current students, I always show them all the pictures of my classroom the first day there. They're like, go teach computer class. And the classroom wasn't set up with computers yet. So we literally had just textbooks to teach them computer class for the first couple of weeks. So it was definitely an interesting journey. And then just over the last 6 years, I kind of grew my love for education and teaching and building curriculum and getting the students engaged and sharing that with like-minded educators.
Yeah, I was impressed. I was fortunate enough to get invited to be part of their advisory council and at the CTC that where Johnny's teaching. And I got a chance to see those labs and I was blown away by what I saw. Like, I mean, as educators, like he said something really key. Like he went into that space and he was forced to teach from the books, but that's a kind of material that has to be taught hands-on. Mm-hmm. The space that he ended up carving out is by far one of the most impressive hands-on spaces I've ever seen as a computer lab. It's just first of all, it's just beautiful to look at. I know that sounds weird. With cable management, everything is like nice and lined up, and everything is like uniform. And I'm like being a military guy, I look at everything in rank and file, and I'm like, oh, this is nice. But it's also a space you could see kids could easily move around in, and also teachers can move around in easily. And it's just a really he has a really good understanding of what makes a good classroom space. Yeah, and I keep sharing that. I have a couple of pictures I keep on sharing with folks on my side of the house, and that's we could always mention where that's going, but it's fantastic to have you here.
Thank you. And yeah, that's one of to hit on what Fred just said, being in a K through 12 setting and not higher ed, we kind of have to pick and choose the pieces each year that we want to add. So we're not just looking at our big yearly purchases. We're saying, okay, how could I get stuff now that I could make last for the next 5 years? Yep. And how could I get the next block and add on to that? So I'm looking at kind of almost 5 years out, but how each of those blocks could kind of shift up and kind of build my classroom throughout. Because again, K through 12, I'm not getting kind of the big purchases you might see at some higher education places or even in industry. So I kind of have to stay current with industry, but at the same time being cost effective as to what I put into everything.
Yep, you're speaking educator language right
Oh,
there.
Definitely.
Yep.
You got to milk it for all it's worth.
Yes, exactly. And it's really interesting to think about this then. If you started kind of bare minimum when you walked in first day at the classroom and you had the textbook, but maybe not the hands-on materials you wanted, how did you start blueprinting out where you were going to go from there?
So the first thing I did was completely rewrite the curriculum that they had pre-built for me. My original program was supposed to be physical security. So like security cameras, alarm systems. And then through my first advisory kind of committee that I met together, I was like, look, I want to take this and make it more into a networking program. I said, kids aren't getting hired to install cameras and just run cables. There needs to be a higher level aspect to it. So from there, I used kind of a little bit of my background, and I actually went around to other career tech centers in the state of Pennsylvania, met with their instructors, saw what they were doing, kind of kept my notes, and through the next year, through a couple grants, I was able to start to streamline the class and start ordering equipment and building off that. And then each year getting feedback from the committee and the students and seeing how we were doing with certifications and seeing how the students were engaged and seeing what else could I get that would help the students, not help myself because I can make do, but I wanted to see what I could get that could make the students have a better experience during their time with me.
Yeah, can I ask you, I want to ask everybody a question that I don't think I know the answer to. So John's mentioned his advisory council. I have an advisory council at the higher ed level. Do advisory councils exist within like your group, Aaron, for English? Do you have a group that you go to? And Pete, do you have a group that you go to music? Like, do you have a musical group that you can kind of consult with that are outside the school? Does that ever happen?
Yeah, it does. So it depends. So in ELA, so for our district, they have, usually it's the department chairs meet almost like as their own advisory council. And they meet with like the coordinator of ELA or humanities across the district. And then there's other opportunities to meet with people within other districts under humanities. And the idea is that as various school leaders meet and learn new things from each other and go through different trainings, they can then come back and share it with the rest of their department at their school. And then right now, the position I'm in, I'm lucky because that's a lot of what I do. I get to meet with, the superintendent's advisory council, the school governance council. So I'm in a fortunate place where I get to learn from various stakeholders, community members, parents, teachers, students, principals. Today I met with just the assistant principals across the district as an advisory council.
Nice.
Yeah. How about you, Pete? I'm curious.
So for us, before COVID, we would have quarterly meetings after school with our supervisor of performing arts for the whole county. And then also on days like we just had election day, or if there's a half day for some reason and all, maybe professional learning, teachers would be in the school working on some sort of professional development, while specialists would then go farm out to a home school where somebody's hosting and all the music teachers would get together and we would do something together like that. it's been continuing, but it's been with Zoom, virtual. But that's pretty much all we have right now for us on that level.
Because the reason why I asked was like, because John, like that was how, I see the value in that, and I loved having that partnership with, and it makes sense because it's a skill oriented concept that your field. Or
exactly.
So
how they do it is the Pennsylvania Department of Ed actually mandates it for career and tech ed programs. So that's why we have to do that. So I actually have my occupational advisory committee, which Fred is on, and members of industry and higher education. But I also have my professional learning network, which is made up of other computer networking teachers throughout the state of Pennsylvania, or the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
And they're impressive.
Yeah, we have some that are like some really cool people doing things across the state that's just different. And I presented this morning at Integrated Learning, one of the PDE conferences, and just seeing what everyone is doing out there with lots of different initiatives across the Commonwealth, but how they're adapting right now with tech was very interesting to see some of the stuff that they were doing.
Oh, wow.
That's fascinating. And so what I'm hearing is that we probably all are saying, whether it's an organized thing through your district or your educational institution, there's no reason why you can't kind of create your own little advisory council, right? Or even if it's of students, like John, I loved how you mentioned you get feedback from your students. Sometimes as teachers, we get all excited about something or think this is the next best thing that we need to have in our classroom, and only to find out, it's not really what the students want, or it doesn't fit what their need is. So I love that you do that. And I think that it's a great lesson that we should probably, empower our students more to kind of share with us, hey, how can we improve your learning for you?
Definitely. And I actually send out a Google form at the end of every quarter. So once the students receive their grades and they kind of provide feedback, like, what did you think about the curriculum this quarter? Do you have anything personally going on? So I kind of get that little feedback from the students, like a check-in on them, but also they provide a reflection and the feedback on the class and on me. And it's interesting to see kind of how they respond compared, like the students that are doing well, how do they respond? Students that are doing okay, how are they going to respond? And then we always have those outliers that are like, I don't like school. So we just kind of
no,
take that with a grain of salt.
You would have enjoyed our trick or treat episode because we shared the tricks and treats of education, and that was certainly one of them. So I'm sitting here thinking this kind of fits into, it's obvious that you like to get your students engaged. You like them to be a part of their learning process, part of the feedback even of your pedagogy, how you're teaching and working with them. So this fits nicely with gamification. So can you define for us in your own words what gamification is, so that listeners everywhere from maybe you've heard the word, don't know what it means, to, oh yeah, I've kind of dabbled in a little bit, have an understanding?
So my personal definition of gamification is the process of taking game concepts such as competitive strategy, team building, even things as simple as point keeping, and applying those to concepts in your curriculum. So you're taking a concept that you have built and just gamifying it, like I said, by adding simple things like points, strategy, team building, and anything that you would take from a gaming concept. The thing that kids like the most is the competitive edge. They're always competitive with each other. So anytime you could make your curriculum competitive, the kids seem to get kind of a big kick out of it.
I still love even with leadership stuff being competitive, right? When we do team building. Can you maybe give us an example of something that you do in the classroom so that people can understand what you mean by that?
Yeah. So you mentioned early on about Dungeons and Dragons. That is one big thing that I tie into my program. I started that initiative right before the pandemic. So it kind of lost a little bit of steam, but at the beginning of this year, we kind of kicked it back up and tied it into my curriculum. So every Friday at the end of class for 45 minutes, the kids participate in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. And I use that to build their literacy and math skills. So they get their tech skills through other developments through curriculum. But we have to teach literacy and math. In every CTE program, whether you teach culinary or carpentry or computers, you need literacy and math standards. And I found that my students sitting at a computer for 5 days a week, 3 hours a day, they were kind of already burnt. They didn't want to sit on the computer and type up a tech article. They didn't want to sit on the computer and solve technical math. So I kind of thought, wow, at the end of the week, I'm pretty burnt out from school. but I have an active Dungeons and Dragons campaign that I look forward to each week. And I'm like, I wonder if I could tie this into the class. So I started like hit up some educational library databases looking for kind of tie-ins, making sure it was official before I kind of presented anything to administration. And there was loads of research, even at the higher level, of people that tied Dungeons and Dragons into curriculum. And what's interesting is Dungeons and Dragons has been around since 1974. And it's been involved. Some of the earliest articles I found are from like 1980, 1981, where educators grabbed it and started using it in their classroom. Huh. I always say that as my class kind of grows, I gain a lot more introverts. I get a lot of kids that don't talk to each other. And by taking them away from the screens for a little bit, putting them around, we have like a U-shaped table around there with just a pen and paper and their imagination. It's interesting to see what they come up with. Because teaching computers, it's black and white. It works or it doesn't. The network cable is right or it's wrong. The program is right or wrong. There's no really gray area. So by allowing the students to use their creative skills and their imagination to learn literacy and math, I feel like I'm kind of switching them over from tech mind to creative mind. So that way we're hitting kind of both parts of their brain during the class. And that's one thing. Oh, yeah, sorry, Fred.
No, you know what? I love that. I've said that for a while here recently, or repetitively recently, is the creativeness. There's so much creativity pent up in tech. It sometimes does get that overlay of gray or bland or binary, like you just said. It either works or it doesn't work. And yet, so many of the great solutions that we're seeing come forward, like even just spoke of at the conference, right, is coming from a tech mindset, but it's incredibly creative. And I think that's something I wish we could see more of in our field as we promote it, because I think there are a lot of young people who are creative types, but they're maybe not drawn to the tech side because they think it is that thing.
Exactly.
And really, it could be such a creative outlet for people. Mm-hmm. But I love it. Keep on going. So it's a great topic.
So the one thing that I do for the first part of the ad initiative is I have students do creative writing. And that's something you really don't hear in a computer networking program. I get a lot of kids creatively write. And I'm like, yeah, if they want to play Dungeons and Dragons, the first thing they are required to do, I provide them like the player's handbook in a PDF format, and they write a 2-page creative written paper. That's the backstory and the creation of their character. So if they're not referencing articles, they're not looking things up online, they're just thinking things up of what they want this character to be, what they want them to do, where they came from, what their emotions are like, and they're using their imagination and creativity to pump it out. And I say 2 pages as the minimum, but I have no maximum on it. There's no maximum. I said you could submit as long as a backstory as you want, and I will read it. I've gotten 12-page backstories from students before, students that claim that they're horrible writers, students that show that they have low reading skills on state tests. And these students, when you give them the option to take control of what they write and let them use that different part of their brain where they're not just regurgitating information, I can't get them to stop typing sometimes. And it's incredible to see. Some of the students you think like, oh, this student has A's and B's, they're going to write a really good backstory. Sometimes they really don't. And it's the students that you don't suspect will do well. It's nice to kind of see them get that little spark of imagination and just kind of flow with it.
Yeah, because I'm thinking storytelling is an important part of that.
Oh, definitely.
You know, kids, if they love to play video games, there's a story that had to be built before the game was actually programmed, right? Even I'm thinking if a company like Apple wants to sell a device, right, they've got to figure out, like there's a whole thing about Steve Jobs and how originally, I think the first ad, right, Fred probably knows this better than I do, about the first computer, it was all the like, this is what it contains, and no one knew what that meant, and it wasn't exciting. So then they kind of rewrote their ad campaign, and it more was about what you're going to be when you're an Apple user. Well, I can enter that story. So I love that you're doing that, John.
Yeah, and it really works on their social skills as well. Like I said, having a classroom full of IT students, a lot of them really don't step outside their comfort zone a lot. They come in, they work on the computers, they tinker with things, but they really don't socialize on an extended level. So by almost allowing them to kind of naturally form a small team is really cool, because they have to decide what class is everyone going to be, how their race that they choose affects the storyline. So they have to kind of build their own kind of community to play this game. So it's nice to see how they kind of piece together in that, and kind of who becomes the leader of the group, who becomes the team player, and kind of how they create these characters with their emotions as well. One example I always give is when I first started this 2 years ago, I had a student who was a varsity defensive lineman for one of their high school football teams. And they created a gnome ranger character, a really small, a really dexterous character. So I asked him, I said, hey, I just wanted to know, like, what was your thought process for creating this? And he said, Mr. Moran, I'm always the big, strong kid, and it's nice to be the small, quick kid, small, quick guy every once in a while. And he goes, if I could have 45 minutes a week where people don't see me as like a 6 foot, 280-pound lineman, he goes, it's pretty cool. And he goes, I can imagine stuff that I can't do, but my character could do. Awesome. And I always tell them that their emotions that they feel playing through the story are real. They're saying that they're their character's emotions, but it's them. It's their imagination, their creativity that they're feeling emotion when they're in suspense, when they're desperate trying to help one of their teammates. Those are live emotions that you can't fake. So it's really cool to kind of draw that out of them.
Oh man, I've got Letitia's not here, but do you guys not hear her voice?
Yes, I could hear it.
John, she would be like, I am so happy to hear you say that. You are, allowing these kids an opportunity to kind of dig deeper, think about themselves, push themselves, socialize, find a So that is amazing. And then the other part of me too is thinking of Crystal, who we've had on a couple times. By the way, she's coming back in November for our gratitude series. She would say this is wonderful because we need to have opportunities to play, right? And so that's what John's doing, is these play times. And then the other part of me, Pete, kind of all over the place, was up really late last night. Braves won the World Series. Woohoo. Pete, I'm thinking of you. How fun would it be? And you're going to say, no, Aaron, this is too much. And you probably already do this, if you have like the storytelling part of a game, and then the kids could create, here's this music that I would hear, or the score, I don't know what you call it, for a game.
Yeah, I was sitting here thinking, oh, Dungeons and Dragons musical. Here we go. Boom. Next PTA meeting. I was totally, as we were sitting here, I was brainstorming. Yep. It's exciting.
I think, John, even though you mentioned, the early 70s and the 80s, I think between Stranger Things and Big Bang Theory.
Oh, definitely.
It's still very much there. And if anything, it's kind of, some people are rediscovering it, or some people still play it, Fred, in their basement. And yeah.
I love the game. I was that geek, I guess, in that sense, but I still have my figures. They're over on my shelf over there, and I have them. And matter of fact, one of my good friends who's a professor out in the West, I won't say what school, but he studies a specific kind of creature on this planet. But we connected through that Stranger Things episode. It brought that to surface again, and we were just talking about all the fun we used to have on that. We used to play late Saturday mornings, at our table, and I was the dungeon master, and I would lay out the map. I loved building the map. I loved doing that. I loved kind of guiding the characters through, and that was my thing. I had a blast with it. And yeah, it's what's fun about it too, John, is what you said about the one person taking on the different persona. And so even that exercise in the software side of the world is really, really big. And it kind of goes back to what Aaron, what you were just alluding to. You're actually lining them up with other life skills that could be used depending upon what industry they do head into. And as an example, in the design class that I'm teaching this semester, they had to do a persona matrix where they created different people from different demographics with different skill sets utilizing this piece of software. And they had to really pull out their imagination to do that. And I found it that some struggled with that because they never had an experience like what you just gave them. So, or it was a long while since they had that opportunity to exercise that little creative muscle, so.
And it's great because the other thing is, a lot of these students, this is their first time publicly showing empathy. Right. So they're feeling compassionate for the other characters. When another character, like one thing we do each year is, when the seniors graduate, we give their characters, and they end the story. Their story's over, and they kind of have a send off. And then the juniors become seniors, and they serve as kind of the experienced veterans of the game, and they kind of have this new class coming through. So it always gets emotional in the games, is where their characters are sending each other off. And it's kind of
wow.
like, I always tied into like the end of the Lord of the Rings, when like kind of Frodo gets on the boat and kind of goes.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it is. And it's really cool, because a lot of the kids, when they even check back in with me, they're like, "Oh, how's the story going? Are you guys still doing Dungeons and Dragons? Like, what happened? Like, what happened after we left?" And that buy-in that they had is they're emotionally invested into it. And a lot of times in regular education, students are invested in the curriculum. They're focused on it. They're academically strong in it, but they're not emotionally invested into it. And if you could emotionally invest into something and have a learning process along the way, all little things are pinging around your brain. You're hitting all sectors on it, because you're building that bridge of not directly teaching, but kind of giving that alternative route to your memory.
Well, that's that intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, right? If you could stoke that intrinsic motivation in them, that they want to strive forward. Now, you're hitting something magical there, as opposed to you saying, okay, if you work real hard, you get an A. Yeah, that's great, but it's nice to have that building up of the inside thing and having them vested. I love that.
Definitely.
A buzzword everybody's hearing out, SEL, social emotional learning, and all this activity, it's off the charts. It's so valuable as an exercise, as a therapeutic activity. Get away from the rigor, just from the human growth aspect. It totally invaluable. Excellent.
And a lot of times people think, "Oh, you're pretending, you're playing pretend." And I try to explain, like, I cringe a little bit. I'm like, role play is different than pretending. When you're pretending, you're faking emotions, you're faking ideas. When you're role playing, you are playing a role in that story. So you are kind of tied into it. I always say pretend is different than your actual kind of role play. I said, I could pretend I'm the Queen of England, but I'm not emotionally invested in being the Queen of England. But when these students create these characters, they're not pretending that they're them. They are them. They're part of their brain. That's a little subconscious. That character lives in them. They created them. That's their little figment. There we go. That's their little spark that kind of motivates them through. They could be having a long week. They could be having some bad life events outside of the pandemic and everything. And we have that 45 minutes where we sit around a table and they're somewhere else, where they're someone else. And that kind of, it's emotional. And seeing it for the first time, I kind of hold back a little bit, because just seeing that pure emotion, that sense of relief that they get, the sense of safety that they get is really, really cool to see.
I love how you said even it's on Fridays, right?
Yep.
So that's their send off to the weekend. You don't know what kind of family life some of these kids have, what kind of home they're going to. You're giving them almost a little bit of a life preserver to get through the weekend. I mean, there's some real amazing stuff happening.
Yeah, and statistically, Fridays used to be my worst day for attendance. A lot of teachers could see that Fridays is the day usually your class isn't entirely there. Since I started this, Fridays usually have perfect attendance. Fridays are the days that all the kids are at school, because they want to play their Dungeons and Dragons campaign, so they have to come to school to do that. And I make sure that all their work is turned in, they're passing the course, and they're kind of, like I said, fully attended to play. And the kind of tie back into that community aspect is they self-police each other in the class a lot more than I ever would have imagined. They're like, "Oh, hey, Anthony, you're not done with this. What could I do to help you get it done so you can play Dungeons and Dragons with us? Oh, hey, so-and-so, Mr. Moran, so-and-so is struggling with this. Is there anything we could do to help them out so they could play with us?" And they kind of want their team together, and it builds that sense of community that sometimes you don't have in classrooms, where sure, they're classmates, they're peers, but that little bit of empathy where they then, sure, we're playing Dungeons and Dragons, but then they care how the others are doing. They care that they're completing their work. They care that they're kind of not burdened by anything in the class. And it serves as one of the buzzwords now is student mentors and student mentoring. So students will say, "Hey, I'm done with my stuff. It's halfway through class on Friday. Could I help so-and-so with their work? Could I show them what I do?" And that's great. So we have a couple of student mentors now in my afternoon class, where instead of coming directly saying, "Mr. Moran, I don't know this," they'll be like, "Oh, hey, Bruce, could you explain to me in your words this?" Because I explain the same thing, like Frank could probably, and everyone else could probably hit on this. We teach almost the same thing every year. So we have a way of explaining things, the way of discussing things, that even though we want to be different a little bit, it's just in our brain a certain way, kind of from doing it for so long. But having another student be able to explain it in their words, they took what I gave them, processed it, and now they're kind of transferring their knowledge to another student. And that's another kind of real big tie into student engagement. That's really cool. And these kids in my class, they're together 5 days a week, 3 hours a day for 3 years. So sophomore, junior, senior year, they're together. So it's really neat to see them progress through that sophomore year, through that senior year together, and like care about each other.
I love that idea of the cohort. I was always intrigued by that concept. I know we see it at the higher education and in the master's degree programs and so on. And trying to duplicate that in higher ed is a real challenge, because you have people coming in sideways to the program or transferring in and out. I know the service academies get to do that, and they get to, there's a big benefit from that, having that cohort come in and then they progress together. So we're going to have to talk, because the one thing I could share with everybody is Johnny is going to be joining our adjunct faculty at our campus here next term. And already he has some former students who are scheduling you, John. I met with a couple of them today. When I told them who's teaching the class, they lit up. Raphael, a matter of fact,
awesome.
He's listening. He spoke
kid.
highly of you. Yeah.
That's awesome. Now I'm sitting here thinking, if we have some listeners out there that want to try to use D&D in their classroom, do you have just some beginners tips for them?
Yeah. So actually, Wizards of the Coast is the company, the sub company under Hasbro now, that runs Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering and some more of their kind of fantasy style games. They offer loads of free resources for educators. They're a little bit of strain now because of the big rise in gamification and all the requests that they receive. But at the beginning of each year, I would send them an email and say, I have X amount of new students, and they would send me character sheet pads and dice for the kids. They called them classroom activity kits for free at no cost. So there's no buy-in for the kids. There's no buy-in for the school. They're free resources. And even with Magic the Gathering, which we'll get into, the card game, Wizards of the Coast sends each student a starter deck. So they don't have to go out and buy cards. They get their own deck to start with. Wow. And it's pretty interesting. So Wizards of the Coast, if you just go and even Google Dungeons and Dragons and go to their main site, they have a huge section on how to play, because they want people to learn and they want to share and they want to build a community of it. I know locally up here, we have several little game stores popping up. We have a one called Adventure Games in Dixon City. There's Dragon Den Hobbies up the road from us, and they offer free lessons for these kids to play. And they even have Magic the Gathering nights, Dungeons and Dragons nights, where one of their employees serves as dungeon master and teaches them how to play. So there are loads of free resources.
I didn't know. I didn't know that. I knew that one place exists.
Costume.
Come on, Frank.
Oh my! I loved it. It's so much fun.
So I love that. Those are really good resources. I'm not familiar with Magic the Gathering. Can you tell us about that one?
Yeah, so I call Magic the Gathering, I call it the gateway to Dungeons and Dragons. So Magic the Gathering has been around since about the mid 90s, like officially, like licensed. And it is just a tabletop card game. So the kids have physical cards, and they use different creatures and spells and artifacts and enchantments through this card game and kind of battle each other. And what's neat is, now that Wizards of the Coast owns both, a lot of the characters that we see in Magic the Gathering kind of roll over to Dungeons and Dragons and vice versa. And I use that as my gateway, because if I came in at the beginning of the school year, like, okay, everyone, we're going to play Dungeons and Dragons, the kids can be like, okay, see you later, Mr. Moran. But Magic the Gathering, by giving them that competitive game first, is their buy-in to it. So I'm like, okay, who wants to face each other in a card game? They all go like, we want to do that. So by teaching them that little gamification competitiveness before we transition and segue to kind of a full role play is kind of really cool. And some of the students that don't feel comfortable at first playing Dungeons and Dragons will still play Magic the Gathering and kind of work on math skills. Reading skills is really big, because you have to read the cards, what they do. Mm-hmm. And I always explain this, because when I first pitch it to my administration, they're like, you want to play a card game? And I'm like, wait a minute, let me show you how you could do algebra with Magic the Gathering. Because there's a lot of cards where they say where the value is X. I showed our director, who's like a former math teacher. I'm like, what is that? She goes, oh, that's algebra. And I was like, yeah, because you have to figure out the variable for X. You have to solve the variable for X. You have to use multiplication, addition, subtraction. And I said, the kids don't use notepads for that. They're doing all this through mental math. So they might say, oh, I'm not good at math. But I'm like, okay, tell me, if you were to attack with this card, what would his life total be? And they're like, oh, a 17. I'm like, you just did math. I said, don't say you're not good at math. You're not good at math that you don't want to do.
That's why it's called Magic the Gathering, because
exactly. Magic's happening, magic math. And one thing that I just want to hit on real fast is the amount of reading my students do after we play Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering is kind of almost doubled if we had not. They're actually going to their library or going to their high school library and seeing if they could get Dungeons and Dragons lore books, because you could get like an authored publication book of that ties in stories from the characters from Dungeons and Dragons that are mainstream or Magic the Gathering. I was telling Fred the other day, one of my students came in with like a Star Wars book, and I was like, hey, you never have a book before. He goes, I know, but he's like, we started playing Dungeons and Dragons and I started writing a little bit. And then I was like, wow, let me read about something I like. So he had one of the Star Wars kind of expanded universe books. And I always tell them, I said, don't be afraid to read what you like. I said, you don't have to go out and read a book on astronomy or physics to be smart. I said, you could go read a book go read some Harry Potter, go read some Lord of the Rings, go read some Star Wars books. I said, any book you read is going to help you at some point.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Love
and
it.
I keep thinking back to the engagement piece and how you're seeing these students grow. And I think because sometimes it's more comfortable to talk in a game and socialize and be in a dialogue.
Definitely.
Than when you're sitting there in an academic setting and some students are afraid, what if I say something wrong? Or what if, someone thinks I'm stupid? And so you're slowly kind of scaffolding that to make them comfortable so that then they become gaming friends. So now when they're willing to take a risk in some kind of academic conversation, they're maybe more willing to do it because they know, oh, this person won't make fun of me because we always, play games together.
Exactly. And like a good example of that is I had a student who had a deep fear of presenting in front of the class. He did not want to present anything. He didn't want to speak in front of the class. Like if he had to ask anything, he would raise his hand and come up to my desk and like talk to me. Like he just didn't want to say anything out loud. In Dungeons and Dragons, he's a bard. He's a musical character. He has to sing songs in the game and cast spells and different things.
What?
Yeah.
What
so, bard, B-A-R-D.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yes.
And I was like, when he created that at first, and I was like, are you sure? Like I said, like you have to like sing and there's music and stuff involved. He goes, yeah, I listen to music all the time. And he actually writes music and plays a guitar at home, stuff that I didn't know about him until we started playing Dungeons and Dragons. So he's like, I like music. And if my character likes music too, he goes, that's kind of their little, again, that little piece of them that they put inside their character. That kind of grows.
Meeting them where they are.
When you brought this up to your admin and say, hey, I want to put this as a major part of my curriculum and all, how many hoops did you have to jump through to get the green light for it? Were they on board right away, or did you have to win them over? Or?
So it was kind of the do it and then seek forgiveness at the beginning. So our director walked in the one time and he's like, we were all sitting around the table and I had like a castle map on the board. He's like, is this computers? And I'm like, guys, what are we learning? And they're like, literacy. And I said, what else? He's like, math. And I was like, okay, go over and sit with one of the students. And I was like, Bruce, show him your character's backstory that you wrote and show him how you figure out your character stats and modifiers and how you calculate dice rolls. And then it was kind of like, okay, you're doing something good here. I'll let you to it. So that's kind of how it kind of came to be. It's not like we're sitting down playing poker, I say, or playing like just Monopoly. We're playing something that's tied into literacy and that I researched and have evidence that I could supply. Because I always say, like, these games were created by troubleshooters. They were created by critical thinkers that were looking for that initial escape and tie into emotion to get everyone else involved. Everyone might not remember their third grade math class. But like Fred said, he remembers his late Saturday mornings playing Dungeons and Dragons with his friends. And it's something that we could picture vividly. So if I could give them that picture and they're like, okay, well, it wasn't Saturday mornings, it was Friday afternoons at school. They'll then link that to being there and be like, oh, you know what else I learned when I was at school? And it kind of is that little bit of a bridge that we educators try to get with our students with their interest and our curriculum and linking them up.
It's okay for learning to be fun.
Definitely.
Right. It's okay for learning to be fun. So I'm sitting here thinking, and I've got a big smile on my face. I love just hearing what you're doing with your kids. John, is there a coach, a mentor, a teacher you had growing up that maybe put a little spark in you, or that you want to give a little shout out to that, you just appreciated now that you kind of look back and see what they did?
So I would say I had two educators over the course of my kind of educational career that hasn't ended yet, that kind of stuck with me. The first being my fourth grade teacher. His name was Mr. Mikovits. And I remember he was the first time that I actually played on the computer. We did Oregon Trail. We learned about the westward expansion. but B is it's the first time he got me reading. I really wasn't an avid reader through elementary school, but I remember he had like a series of like his library was Goosebump books. And one of our rewards is if we got like good grades in the class and did our work, we got to go over and read one of the Goosebumps books. I just remember like laying on the ground in fourth grade with all my work done on Friday, even staying in during recess and reading like those Goosebumps books. And I just remember like him being like super cool with that. I'm like, wow, he got me reading, and just like little things like that.
That's awesome.
And from the educator standpoint, I had a professor at Keystone who also he teaches at is it Penn Tech now, Fred? Is it Penn? What's Pennsylvania College of Tech? I forget what they recently. Because they went through a whole like rejuvenation.
Yeah, it's with PCT, Pennsylvania College of Technology. Oh my gosh, I should know this.
That's okay. There'll be another test on it later.
Yes, they're not a sponsor anymore. Good one, Fred.
I know who you mean. You mean down in Danville, right?
Yeah, it's like Penn State's Career and Tech Center.
I think it's still considered PCT, Pennsylvania College of Technology.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know they went through a rebrand.
Yeah.
But I digress. So he's currently there, but he was at Keystone when I went there, and he was Steven Scavich. We called him Steve C. And he actually taught one of my graduate classes at Wilkes. And he's like, John, our first Zoom, he's like, John. I'm like, Steve. And I was like, we're here again. And just kind of giving me that first initial touch of higher education. I saw how much he loved technology and teaching it to us, and he still is teaching it. And that kind of made me think like, wow, like teaching IT is pretty cool. And
it is PCT. It is still Pennsylvania College of Technology.
Oh, okay,
I wanted to make sure we got that out there right.
Those acronyms in education, they'll get you every time.
Oh man, you're not kidding. But that's a great program.
John, we usually do like a little takeaways of something from the conversation. So we're going to do that. And then we'll let you as our guest kind of give the last word, some kind of spark, some kind of last thing you want to impart with us before you leave the teacher's pep rally. I really wish I had thought about this ahead of time, Fred and Pete. Wouldn't it have been fun for us to have created our character?
Oh man.
I want to see one of Fred's figures. I want to hear the name and everything, the story.
You know what, we might have
I'll get a picture of them and put them out. I have them all.
Will you do that for us? Maybe you could put on the teacher pep rally Facebook page. That'd be awesome.
So John, they're all lead.
This is what we're going to do. We're going to do a little takeaway, something from the conversation, and then we'll hand it back to you. Fred, I'm going to call on you first.
Thank you. I love going first. So it's, you know what, John, everything you were saying just resonates with me, and I've applied gamification techniques of my own. And I think something you said in a variety of ways was the fact that you're meeting them where they are. You said something about get the next building block to you're building into the next class, like getting them to that lead in. And I think that's a really, really key concept. And I think just by the fact that you're reaching to them starts to create that relationship that all teachers strive for. And that allows you then to get to the next level. Because some of the concepts you do cover are highly technical. And if you don't have buy-in, man, I know what that's like. That goes hand in hand with what, we teach, or we sell broccoli, right? Some of our stuff is broccoli like oriented material. And if you don't get that buy-in, it could be a long day of hating vegetables. But I love what you're doing. I think I think you're setting a great example, and there's so many, it could keep on going. And that's what I think is what's fun, is that every class you teach as a teacher, you could always be creating some kind of gamification element to it. It's challenging, but it could always be different, and everything you teach and everything you do. So I think it's fun. I really admire what you're doing.
Thank you.
Pete?
Yeah. The most successful and, dare I say, happy educators are the ones who take something they're passionate about, very often something we learn in childhood that they've held on to, and they have the courage to put it into their classroom to help strengthen their curriculum, to liven it up, reach kids in a different way, fill in gaps. I think everybody on the screen's done that. So it's invaluable what you're doing for these kids. It's excellent. I think that's exactly what you're doing. You're taking a childhood passion and you're figuring out a way to be the best out there for these kids. So way to go.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just kind of continue with that. I wrote down a couple things that maybe people wouldn't think about in their having in their classroom, but I heard tinkering, gaming, creating, reading. Like those are all things that I love to do on a daily basis. So you tell someone who's maybe not a lifelong learner like me and loves to learn and read, but you've got all these kinds of gaming and being creative and tinkering, then I'm sold. So I love that there's this gamut of things that I feel like every person in your classroom could kind of attach themselves to. And then at the end of the day, I mean, you've got kids wanting to be at school because of it. So thanks for sharing your passion today.
Thank you.
So, John, any last words you like, or something that maybe an idea you got sparked as we were talking today? You get kind of the last word here.
I just wanted to say, don't be afraid to follow your imagination for what you are teaching. If you want to think outside the box, go for it. Because anything that you could get out of the cookie cutter mindset is something that your students and fellow educators could attach themselves to and build connections with. We can only get so far with a textbook, is what I say. It's when we open it up and what else we could do to kind of connect the students to that material is what we need to do as educators to keep them interested in their own learning and give them the ability to use their entire brain and not just a part of it that they need for our class.
Absolutely. And if someone wants to reach out to you, even if it's like a LinkedIn address or anything like that, do you care to share that where people can connect with you?
Yeah, so I'll send you if we could post it, my actual link for my LinkedIn. LinkedIn's the best for anything educational wise.
Sure.
So that way you could message me through there. You could kind of hit me up if you need anything. I'm more than happy to provide links to resources or even help you start your own game. If there's an educator out there that's listening, it's like, hey, I really like this. I want to start this in my school. How do I do it? I'm more than happy to provide a template of what you could do to kind of get the ball rolling. Because the first step is making sure that you as an educator could be as good as Dungeon Master as Fred is. So we want to make sure that we're capable of doing that for everybody.
That's great. Thanks, John. So, Pete, where do our listeners find us so they can get information from our great guests like John?
Visit our Facebook group, Teacher Pep Rally, our website, teacherpeprally.com, and our hotline, 678-439-TPR1. I want to everybody call in. Let us know what you think Fred's Dungeon and Dragons character name is.
That's a great idea. I like to hear that.
Perfect.
Well, thank you, John. We had such a nice time having you on here. Next time, maybe we'll get a D&D game going.
That would be
Zoom.
a blast.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Cool.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks,
you.
John.
Yep,
Take care.
Take care. Yep. Be well.